Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. Inside the Set is a series that focuses on the design and decor of stories that excite us and ignite our imaginations, where we get to discuss the collaborations between production designers and set decorators, and hear firsthand accounts of how those works of art came to be, from their inception to ideas on the page through completion, where we sit in the dark and experience them collectively.
Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. I'm Regina Graves SDSA. Joining me today are set decorator Philippa Culpepper SDSA and production designer Meredith Lippincott to discuss their collaboration on the film She Said. The film tells the story of how New York reporters Megan Twohey and Jodi Kantor broke the story regarding decades of sexual abuse accusations against Harvey Weinstein. Ladies, before we get into the film, I would love to know how both of you got started in this industry. It's something that our viewers really love to know about. It's an interesting topic. So Pippa, can you start and let us know how you got into this film industry?
Sure. I had the good fortune to spend most of my education in London, the UK, because that's where I lived when I was a child. And I went to art school there. And I became an installation artist, only to graduate and realize that you needed a decent amount of money to make installation art, and no one bought it to put it on their walls. So I used my skills to become a prop fabricator and built props for Shakespeare's Globe for 2 seasons and built sets for them. So I learned a lot of carpentry, a lot of prop fabrication. And from there, I had friends ask me to help them on their small little films. And I fell into it almost by accident, but it turned out to be exactly the right fit that I was looking for. So just continued along that path. I mean, it took me about 5 years of doing films for free on the side, as well as my day job as working in an antique store or doing visual merchandising for shop windows, that kind of stuff. But once I was in it, I was in it. And I've been in New York for 10 years and love it here.
Well, I'm glad you got into the business. Of course, for my personal reasons, I love working with you because you're great. And Meredith, what about you?
It's funny, we do have some overlap, Pippa, and our origin stories. But I was like one of those kids in high school who was just really into art, and I painted a lot, and I did ceramics, and I also was in theater, and I kind of didn't know, how do you combine all of these interests into one thing? And then very sort of ironically, I saw a play right before I went to college that's got past designs. That was like a Martin McDonough play. And then I figured out, that's a job in film. And then just kind of got into it from there, but sort of had a similar coming up as Pippa, where I spent many years kind of doing friends' tiny micro budget features and shorts and doing all of this for no money. But then I was simultaneously art assisting on bigger shows. And then also I did graphics for a while too. And then it kind of took about 5 years for me to fully transition into designing full time. So now it's today.
I actually met Meredith when she was a graphic designer on a film, a very small period film that I was decorating. So when she called me to do this one, I was like, I know this woman's got a really good eye. Like, she's very, very, a lot of attention to detail. I was like, okay, I think I could probably work for her.
Meredith, what brought you to this project? What attracted you, and how did you come about it all? It's such a serious and important film.
Yeah, I was originally approached by Dee Gardner, who's one of the producers on the film. And I had obviously, like many of us working in the film industry, followed the Harvey Weinstein, downfall pretty closely, and was, really familiar with the New York Times story. I actually hadn't read Jodi and Megan's book at that point, but had read the piece in the New York Times. And so, yeah, I mean, it's very straightforward, but I just thought, wow, this would be, very interesting to bring to life. And I was really moved by, hearing Dee talk about it. She's also somebody that I had wanted to work with for a long time. I think she has a really great approach to all different kinds of material, especially really character-driven work. And so, yeah, it actually all came together very quickly. I think I read the script, met Dee Dee and Lila, the executive producer, met Maria, the director, all within maybe a 48-hour period, was hired, and then started the following Monday. Yeah, it was just very, very fast. The whole process. There was a little bit less of what I feel like we sometimes get, where it's like a maybe 3 to 4 week or whatever lag time between getting the job and getting into it.
So this was like really quick. And Pippa, what about you? I think you just touched on it before that, you and Meredith knew each other. So I'm sure that's what brought you to the project. Was a big.
Yeah, I mean, I've known Meredith for several years now and always admired her approach in terms of attention to detail, like I said before. But also on a personal level, I've always really loved journalism movies and movies about journalism. All the President's Men, Spotlight. I've always been really interested in those. And not only did I feel like the subject matter was really important as women working in the industry, but also it was going to be interesting representing characters that were still alive. I've done a decent amount of period stuff, especially with you, Regina, and you never have to worry about those characters worrying, how you represented them. Whereas these characters are incredibly important to the story. It takes place in 2017. Like, it's very recent history. So I felt like that was going to be its own challenge that I wanted to have experience doing.
And Meredith, when you got together with Maria, like, what were your points, and like, what did you want to convey on the screen to tell this story and to tell it truthfully, and to make it all about the journalists?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what Pippa says is actually really interesting, and is something that was kind of a through line for us the whole time, that we talked to Maria about a lot. Especially at the beginning, it was like some of me and Maria's initial conversations, which is just with it being a contemporary film, but then also a film about very real people, both the journalists and all of the victims and whistleblowers that, are left in Harvey Weinstein's wake over the past, decades. You have the opportunity to really show their humanity and show who these people are very specifically and uniquely, and wanting to honor that, and while also creating a very consistent, aesthetic through line, having it be cinematic, like working with, like a tighter color palette, and, also having it be really deeply rooted in reality. So it's like sort of the juxtaposition of that. So it's like, it's not a documentary, it's not a one-to-one copy. We are making a narrative film, but how do we really, sort of like showcase like the specificities of all of these women and really honor their stories, I guess, is the best way.
Mm-hmm. And you know what, I was reading, it was very important, like you said, to keep the film accurate and really truthful to the reporters' experiences. And I really saw that, through the sets and through especially like Meredith's and Jodi's homes, and that there were real people, and they had lives and they had children, and their surroundings, even their work surroundings, really like gave you a sense of who they were as people. Which to me was really important in the film. And I love that you didn't really showcase, the rape scene and that too much. But what were the challenges? Were there any challenges, especially shooting through COVID? And, well, I've read that you had somewhere like 140 locations that you shot. People think that because it's contemporary that it might be easier to do, but it doesn't seem like it was easy at all. What were your challenges?
I mean, I think the first conversation Pippa and I had when I asked her to do the project with me, I forget the exact phrase you said, Pippa, but you were like, you don't need a set decorator, you need a logistical wizard or something, which was like the first thing that we were really tackling was, oh yeah, there are over 100 locations in this film. And you know what that's like, Regina, especially when your locations are in Westchester and they're in Long Island, and then the stage is in Long Island, and we're shooting in Manhattan and Roosevelt Island. And you're one person and you have 24 hours in a day. So I think that was the biggest hurdle by far. I'd be curious to hear what Pippa has to say about it too. And again, just maintaining a consistency and having a consistent aesthetic, but still juxtaposing all these different characters at the same time, and being like weirdly period accurate with the technology, which is not insanely difficult, but you are thinking about it a lot because it's 5 years ago, and then avoiding all the COVID stuff on top of it in New York, like the shack, the like little COVID, shack is not the right word, but like little vestibules for the restaurants and things like that, and all the signage. So
yeah, we were definitely chasing like hand sanitizer bottles and COVID signage off of every set, and having to do like little backflips, like figure out weird framing angles or putting up window treatments where there necessarily wouldn't be, because we'd be shooting in a restaurant, looking out a giant picture window at one of those outdoor COVID shacks, which we didn't have the resources to broom, or the permission to broom away and bring back again. I mean, what I will say is that I, as a decorator, I have the benefit of being able to put together a really good team. So my assistant set decorators, Ashley Wellbrock and Amanda Finnegan, and our shopper, Christina Gould, and my lead person, Ace Huggins, were really instrumental in making sure that we could do every single set without trying to dropping too many balls. Because we only really had 8 weeks of shooting in New York City locations, and the sets were all spread out, and we had to do a number of sets that weren't shooting as New York. We shot for Ireland, we shot for Wales, we shot for Cornwall, we shot for Hong Kong, all in sets in New York. So trying to balance all those things was really down to having a killer team to back me up, because you just can't physically be in every place at once.
Definitely. And I know that you built some sets, and you actually you shot in the New York Times building. What was that like?
Oh my God, it was incredible. I mean, when you're in a building designed by Renzo Piano, and you're just around every corner is our Herman Miller chair, and he had this incredible photography because the New York Times has just an amazing inventory of editorial photography that's just all over the place. It's an incredible environment to shoot in, but it's also very challenging because not all the photography and all the artwork can be cleared. So you have to play this do-si-do of finding out which artworks you can show and which artworks you can put there. And then they also very recently went through a redecoration phase. So I had to work very closely with the facilities manager, Patrick Whelan, and Ace, our lead person, to try to take away some of the very contemporary furniture and put back some of the furniture that would have been truer to 2017. I mean, what I will say is that walking to the New York Times building the way we did, the journalists had not come back from COVID yet. So when we walked in there, it was like everyone dropped tools in March of 2020, and it was a ghost town. Like the newspapers dated to the exact date that they had left the building, and the desks were all intact. They just probably took their most like confidential personal items, but everything was intact. So it was a research exercise. It was incredible because you saw how people kept their shoes under their desks, how they piled their papers and their books. There were coffee mugs still there that still had coffee stains on the bottom of them. It was like walking into a ghost town, but as a decorator, it was just like all of those real life details that are so hard to find otherwise when you're trying to research a project, and it was all there. We couldn't shoot it as is because these are people's personal spaces, and the floor that we used as Megan and Jody's floor was actually the graphics department, so we had to redress it so it was more of a newsroom as opposed to a graphics department, to take out a lot of more arty stuff and then reintroduce all of the different layers, the computers, all the hardware, all the changes of clothes, the snacks, the vitamins, the plants. And so that was just amazing, the way that we had access to all of that architecture around us that really helped sell the design.
That's great. And speaking of research, how did you go about your research when you first started the project, Meredith? Were there photos that you looked at? Did you look back the New York Times building? Did you read the book that the journalists wrote afterwards? I mean, what did you do to prepare for this?
Yeah, I read the book. That was kind of the first thing on the agenda, just to get the full experience of what this was like for Jody and Megan from start to finish. I also was able to interview both of them in their homes, which was really informative, take a lot of photos of their homes, figure out what their process is like as journalists, but also just as importantly, what their process is like as, mothers and wives, and how their work relates back to their family, and how they make it work with their husbands who both also work full time. And then also I'm very, photo heavy researcher. I started off researching too, in addition to doing graphics, like in all my odd jobs in my 20s. So I really love researching. We pulled a lot from Apartamento magazine. I also pulled a lot from some of my favorite photographers that were applicable for this, like Doug DuBois, also some Terrence Conran stuff. And then all for the New York Times offices, Kathy Ryan did this amazing photo series of photos inside the building pre-COVID. But that was a big reference for when we were talking about the New York Times building, especially when we ended up having to build a conference room on the stage, which was sort of a logistics thing. Like we had X number of days to shoot at the actual building, and then we had Y number of scenes. So we had 5 days on the stage, I think, for the conference room, or maybe it was 3, something like that. Yeah, lots of photo research. We also had a researcher on, Erin McGurl, who was on with us for Run of Show. So she also did a ton of supplementary internet research and archivist research. And she has a background as a librarian. So she's really good at doing like hardcore archive, like database research that is, maybe not super straightforward. And I felt like that was really helpful, especially when we got into more graphic specific research, which we had to do a lot. Also, with my background, like I'm pretty specific about the graphics. I love to have a reference for every single graphic. So we started off big picture, but then eventually ended up doing a lot of research for the very specific minutia as well. So,
And Pippa, what about you?
I really loved Meredith's photography that we pulled out. And we had a lot of conversations back and forth. It's like, what exactly from this photograph do you want to emulate? Oh, I think this is a great idea if we do this. And it was really good to feel how evocative that was, to try to get a feeling of what something should be instead of more of the details. I think it also fit very well with the director's aesthetic, because Samira Straight is German and a lot of Meredith's source material was European. So the way that the spaces were created by the furniture of the room or the people, it didn't look staged at all. So the emphasis for us was really trying to create spaces that looked lived in. Like none of these were supposed to look like sets. I mean, I think, Regina, you and I had this conversation, and you quite rightly pointed out that, when you're watching a film, you shouldn't be seeing the sets. Like the sets should enhance the overall story. And I really felt we were really trying to do that with this, because we were telling a true story, and we just wanted to literally be the background. So for us, and also to Meredith's point too, like drawing on all of our own lives and how busy we are as working women with families and crazy schedules. Like we'd send photographs back and forth to each other of our own apartments. Like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Like, I have young kids. Like, I just look at the mess around me on the floor and on the kitchen table and go, all right, that's a good countertop dressing reference, actually, between like the sippy cups and the cereal boxes and the diapers so trying to filter in all that. And then, like you said, like walking around the New York Times building and just seeing everywhere you went, there was a beautiful reference for how a desk should look. Mm-hmm. Like we couldn't use actually that desk. We had to emulate it, which is almost harder in a way. But like to have the real thing there from working journalists was just incredible. Like you wouldn't be able to find that stuff online or in publications.
Definitely. I love that. And I hope you took a lot of pictures for future.
Oh, yeah.
I might be calling you for it one day.
Yeah.
And Meredith, a lot of people don't know this, Meredith, or maybe they do in the film industry, but you work hand in hand with picking the locations for the film. How did you go about that? Like what kind of motivated you towards certain choices, especially, you were in England, they were in California, they were in the Hamptons. Was it easy? Was it hard? Did you kind of just go like geography? How did that all come about?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely challenging just again with the sheer volume of the number of sets and locations, but I really enjoyed collaborating with the location manager, Grace Kwan. And the first few weeks were really just me and her in the car together, driving all over, trying to knock out as many of these as possible to find good options for them. And part of that too was just on a logistical level. We didn't get the director in person with us until 6 weeks out from shooting, which is very tough. And that was because there were visa issues. We were still in like pretty bad COVID. Stuff wasn't getting processed fast enough. So that wasn't the plan, but that's what ended up happening. So Grace and I ended up working really closely together, putting together these online packets that we would send to her and communicate to the producers as well to try to move stuff forward as much as we could, because we knew also we got to start, making some headway with these. So we're not, on the tech scout and we're missing 40 locations or what have you. But I mean, what are the factors? Obviously aesthetics, trying to find stuff that has the spirit of what we're looking for as much as possible, even though we know we're going to amend a lot to these locations, both with paint and construction, and of course a ton with set deck, but making sure the bones are correct, that the layout works, compositionally it's going to be interesting, and that overall it's not wrong period wise too, because we were dealing with a lot of stuff that was not very contemporary. I think Jody's apartment is like one of the most hyper contemporary locations, but like Megan's is older. The other iterations of Megan's are older. Laura's house is supposed to be older. So making sure everything's aligned that way. And then like you're saying too, logistically, that of course comes into play. There were many days where we had 3 company moves, some days where we had 4. So we had to figure out like what to pair with what really early on and what made sense to pair with what. And that was something that Grace and I worked together on a lot too, with even before the AD started, but then eventually with the AD of like, okay, well, like we think we can find these 3 things together. Like, does that work with X, Y, and Z? And then I think Pippa and I talked a lot too about sort of like what's the best way to phrase this, but basically like our levels of sets too, like where is like most of our work going, because obviously like we have to split everything up so much, like what has the most screen time, what are going to be full dresses versus what are we going to try to use a little bit that's there were actually a lot more full dresses than you would think, for something that's so contemporary and has so many locations, but there were a lot. And so it was about prioritizing those, trying to find locations that give us some stuff to work with, but also maybe just weren't that far away if we were going to do a full dress, because we knew we'd be bouncing around so much.
Yeah, and I think that was it. It was pretty challenging in that I think almost every location, bar some of the exteriors, we had to touch, not only to cover up COVID stuff, but also because a lot of the places we shot in had pre-existing artwork that we couldn't clear for the purposes of using on screen. So we had to do a lot of artwork replacement. So like, for instance, we shot in the Capitol Grill downtown New York, which is an amazing location for these really important scenes with Irwin Ryder and Jody Cantor. And they had this amazing gilt frame artwork everywhere. And we had to replace every single piece. And it must have been about 25 to 30 pieces, because we shot in several areas of the restaurant. So for a beautiful location that should have just been a walk-in and shoot, actually presented a decent amount of challenges, and not even from a set deck perspective, but from a manpower perspective too. Like we kept our crews pretty lean, mainly because still in the thick of COVID testing, like testing in new people rapidly really wasn't an option. So for us, it was having a smaller number of crew that were just really good and bouncing them around and figuring out where to put the most resources. So, and just really trying to triage. I think Meredith used the word triage at one point when we were talking instead of prioritize. That's really what it felt like.
And I think you're right too, Pippa, that like at the bare minimum, if we weren't overhauling a set, we were dealing with artwork and lighting. We had like a big lighting task on almost every set. And then window treatments a lot too.
Well, that was on the my next question, so I'm glad you led into that. So lighting has become like a big thing, I think. Well, not has just become, but working with the DP, they have so many special requests lately. Or maybe not always, maybe it's always been. But what were your challenges and how did you work with the DP? Did you work side by side with them? Did they always have some input on how things were to be lit? Do they have any requests for special lighting fixtures? How did that all go about?
I mean, what I would say is that I feel like in every job that I do, you have to work closely with the DP. And I really respect a DP who wants to have a conversation with the set deck and the production designer, because often some of the challenges of the sets that we were shooting in is that they were small Brooklyn apartments. So you really only see pretty much what you're seeing of us right now. So shooting into a lot of corners, a lot of walls, and therefore a lot of the lighting has to be practical sources, because there just isn't room to put any other film lighting through, especially when they did a lot of really beautiful shots going where you could see windows in the city street behind the character at night. So the windows in the background, so they couldn't even light through the windows at that point. So with that in mind, like we just had to rigorously find the right kind of light fixtures. This was because of the type of format they were using or the personal taste of the DP. We weren't using any LED lighting at all. And as you know, as a decorator, that can be quite challenging these days because most lights now available on the open market are almost all rewired to be LED. So trying to keep a contemporary look for a film and trying to just find the huge number of lamps that could take an incandescent fixture and put them on there and still have them look right for the DP and also for us in terms of aesthetics was really challenging.
Yeah, we would have a specific vision for everything too. So sort of the process would be Pippa and I would have a plan and then we would talk to the DP about it and then just sort of get on the same page. And it would sometimes be a little bit of back and forth, but like Pippa's saying, where it's either an LED issue or it would be needing to have a practical in a certain spot. And then Regina, it's like then we would have a consideration of like it can only be this kind of light, it can't be that kind of light because it doesn't make sense. And so there's like a lot of big logic conversation on top of the lighting conversation. And I think we ended up having to do a handful of custom lights in that, like that construction built, because again, it was a combo of like Pippa and I wanting it to be a certain thing aesthetically and size wise, and then collaborating with the DP and it, needing to, I guess the same thing.
And also, the challenges with having so many locations in such a tight shooting schedule, because we shot everything in 8 weeks, was that sometimes with the schedule flip, something that we thought was going to shoot in the daytime would shoot in the nighttime. So suddenly all the light that was supposed to be ambient, we got these beautiful shades for, especially Laura Madden's house was one of these. We decided to use this incredible drum shade over her dining table to get this beautiful ambient light on her and her kids. And in the end, the DP, because the time of day that we were shooting at, wanted something that was a little bit more focused. So pretty much overnight, we had to find an unusual kind of solid fixture that gave a more directional light. And the same thing in Jodie Cantor's apartment, there was a change from the lighting side that meant that we had put these very sleek roll down shades that were very accurate to Jodie's actual apartment. And then overnight, they needed shears on the window, and the shears needed to be a color too. So it wasn't as simple as just going out to Bed Bath and buying a cream colored shear and putting them on there. It was a very specific change, which made sense in the end. But it's those kind of curveballs that in the moment you don't understand why you're doing it, and then when you shoot it, you think, all right, that looks pretty good.
And as far as Jody and Megan were concerned, because they're real life people, and like you said, you're telling a story and you're portraying their homes. And I know you had photos and you had research and you spent some time with them, Meredith. But after they saw the film, or when you were getting ready, did they ever come visit the set? Or afterwards, after they saw the film, were they happy with the way you portrayed them? Did they feel like it was a good portrayal of how they live? And tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think so. I feel like my impression is that they both were just genuinely very tickled by the whole process, and it must be very strange. And their husbands also felt the same way too. I remember having a bunch of conversations with Megan's husband, Vadim, in general, and I think he was just like, this is such a strange experience and process, and like asking them so many specific questions about like, what kind of notebook do you use, or where's this piece of furniture from, or whatever. Just they thought they would never get asked that. And also they're so used to asking people questions that I think it was a bit funny for them at first just to be kind of like grilled about what they probably think is like really mundane things about their life. But there's a lot of good sort of specific stuff in like researching their houses and like looking at their real houses, looking at photos, and like Pippa and I talking about it. But at the end of the day, it's a narrative film. So we don't want to do a one-to-one recreation because I think it's just not very cinematic, and it doesn't like create this aesthetic through line that we're trying to create with all of the sets in the movie. But we definitely used it as the base. And there were a couple of things that were really kind of interesting in their real spaces. Like Jody does live in a condo like that, and the layout of it is very similar to the layout that we built on the stage, because it was just like a really, really great cinematic layout and wasn't necessarily expecting that. And our original plan actually was to build both Jody's and Megan and Vadim's apartments on the stage, but then we ended up flipping later down the line because we had to build the New York Times conference room. And so then there was an impetus to build that. And then it was a sort of cost issue about building all three. So we ended up finding this nice garden apartment in Prospect Heights for Megan and Vadim. That layout wise and sort of like compositionally was very different from their real apartment, but it invoked the same spirit that we wanted, which was sort of, pre-war, original details, again, to kind of like juxtapose between Megan and Jody, because when you see their real spaces, you kind of see the differences in their personalities, also like the differences in where they are family-wise and like career-wise a little bit. Just Megan moved to New York a lot later than Jody. Jody had been working at the New York Times since 2004. I think she had bought the condo in the early aughts, something like that. And then Megan moved in 2016. So it's like, I kind of feel like seeing their places in real life and then creating them in the movie kind of helps show that background a little bit too, which is helpful because you don't want the two characters to just feel like journalist robots that are like the same person, obviously. And they're obviously both insanely great journalists, but just I think wherever we could build that up was really great because it's not like they have wildly different aesthetics.
Was there anything that was any sets that were maybe interesting or important to the film that didn't make the cut? That always happens.
Yeah, I mean, we had this really interesting situation that Meredith and I had a lot of fun with, where you saw Megan and Vadim's life before they got together, and it was sort of in the script. It's a setting up of the character's backstory almost. So you see Megan in her apartment as a single person. You see Vadim in his apartment when they just start dating, and then you see them live together. So we had this really fun game where we were like, well, what furniture did they take from Megan's apartment to their shared apartment? What furniture did they take from Vadim's apartment to their shared apartment? So you could sense both their personalities and see the stages of their apartment, from having just moved in to having a baby to being more established, and then just see the chaos unfold around her as she's trying to juggle all these things. So I feel like not when you watch the film and you don't see that part of the backstory, so her apartment by herself and the Dean's apartment when in the early part of the relationship, you don't see that crossover and that mesh once you get to their shared apartment in Brooklyn. I mean, for me, that's a very small set deck detail, but it's something we had a lot of fun with and didn't actually make the cut. It would have been a really long film if they'd put that in.
And what about like what are the pros and cons for you of like locations opposed to building sets?
It really depends on the set. I mean, as you know, as a decorator, we have to deal with everything from the flooring to the tiling to the real bones of the building before, as well as the interior decor. Jodi's was a lot of fun because we got to do that from the ground up and like pick her backsplash tile and the flooring and the countertop material and all that kind of stuff. Whereas Megan and Vadim's was an old brownstone. So you had all of that beautiful woodwork and the shutters. So you were able to, I feel like the texture of that was much nicer to be done on location, even though the layout of the apartment and the spaces were a lot smaller. So you didn't necessarily see as much of the set as I would have liked. The other thing was that we shot Laura Madden's Welsh home in Whitestone in Queens. And having grown up in the UK myself, I was very familiar with the architecture vernacular of that region, and it just doesn't exist here. So for me, it was really challenging to work in a space that was architecturally very different from what we wanted for her. So we had to do a lot of kind of set dressing camouflage. Like you won't see any of the window frames. You don't really, the heights of the ceilings are a little bit tricky. You never see the front door. Like there's a lot of shots where you don't ever see the kitchen cabinets because the kitchen cabinets are very American. Like it was very much trying to source for a Welsh home using only American materials in a house in Queens. So that was incredibly challenging. Probably one of those sets that had we had the resources, I would have pushed really hard to build because it would have been a lot simpler to give that kind of atmosphere and space that a Welsh home probably would have had.
Well, you fooled me. I thought you were. Is there anything else that I haven't touched upon as far as like the movie itself or your experience on it as a whole? Because like I said, I didn't want to go too much into detail of the storyline and all of that, but anything you want to share about your experience working on it and how you feel about it and what makes you the proudest? And
I feel like I'm just really proud of sort of like the overall accomplishment of like getting all of these sets really consistent and feeling like we were able to deliver all of them, even with like the time constraint, the budget constraint, like not being able to build as much as we wanted to. Going back to that a little bit too, I think that it would have been amazing if we could have built more on this movie, but it's just, that's how it goes sometimes. And I also am really, I was really surprised that there were some really specific research projects on this movie that I did not anticipate. Like we actually did a ton of American Revolutionary War research, which you would not expect.
That was really fun, actually. That was a lot of fun.
Really fun. And then also simultaneously a lot of 1992 era film set research, because in the movie, there's a movie within a movie that one of the characters works on that's supposed to be a Harvey Weinstein movie from the early 90s. So that was a huge research project and very fun to do. And the set was in the middle of the woods. I don't even remember where, but I remember parking there and then Pippa driving me down to it on the day of the shoot in a golf cart in the dark. So that was another highlight.
Well, that looked great. That was the whole opening. I loved it. And what about you, Pippa? How do you feel?
I feel like the overall accomplishment, I think, is really important that we don't ignore. We spent, I think Meredith, was it 2 whole weeks in the New York Times building?
Yes.
So I think it was probably came to like 2 weeks, probably 10 to 12 days in total. shooting, not including the prep and the wrap. And you have these epic sweeping shots of the bullpen, the double height bullpen. So I think all in all, by the time we were done there, we had dressed probably over 120 desks.
Wow.
In that building. And each desk, especially we probably had about 50 desks around Megan and Jody's area that in that clip there. And each of them had to be pretty personalized. So not only trying to figure out what computer screens people are using, but all of the things they bring with them to work, the lunch boxes, the thermoses, the notebooks, trying to just get the sheer volume of paperwork printed, because it had to be paperwork that we could see on camera. So our graphic designer, Zelda, had just helped us like create this enormous amount of paper material that we could put on the bulletin boards and dress on the desks. And it was just a Herculean effort, mainly also too, because the bullpen section where you see all those television screens was still in operation while we were shooting there. It was pretty much the only part of the building that had employees coming there day to day, because it was the breaking news section. And actually this office, Dean Beckett's office, is one that I love the most, because we took very forensically detailed photos of his actual office and recreated them, but with our own little spin on them. So I think we did a really good job of getting the layering effect in there, just to really show his personality. And also it's Matt Purdy's office too. Like we got permission to use Matt Purdy's own personal photos. So we have photos of Matt Purdy's actual son on the desk. And then when Matt Purdy and Dean Beckett came in, and Rebecca Corbett actually physically themselves came for a set visit, and I got the chance to meet them, it was really wild for them to see their offices looking like their offices and being recreated. And I thought that was really, really good.
Wow. It seems like a big undertaking. So how much prep did you have to do that? How much prep time? And you had to change out most of those computer screens?
For the New York Times building, we probably spent about 7 days dressing.
Remember, Pippa, though, was at the same time that Gianni was in the ceiling changing out all the lights. So it was like both departments were truly on top
of each other.
Yeah, it was really hard.
Every single light bulb. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. But again, the New York Times building made it incredibly easy for us to work with them. Their facilities manager, Patrick, was just an angel and knew everything about the building. So he worked really closely with my lead person, Ace, to make sure we could get everything loaded in and the right areas got protected. And that when we dressed, like we had to be really specific about the way that we undressed people's desks, because we knew that when we were done with that area, we had to redress it so that when they came back finally to work after their COVID break, that they could come back to their environment and we hadn't messed with it with too much. Mm-hmm. So we had to be really organized about it. And I'm pretty sure we pulled it off.
Are there any other sets you want to talk about?
Yeah, this was in New York. This was at actually the same building that when we were talking about locations, pairing stuff together, this shot in the same building, in the same hotel as the Linda Fairstein office, and as one of the hotel corridors, and as Jody's London hotel room. And it's this hotel called the Lottie Palace Hotel. And it's just very unique in the sense that it has different styles of rooms and spaces throughout it. And there's this one unique suite that we used for the Dublin hotel room that really suited our needs and was, I think, pretty successful as Harvey Weinstein's Dublin hotel suite in 1992. So we used all of the furniture that was there. This was a very prop set deck combo heavy set, mm-hmm. where Pippa and I talked about a lot, character. And this is the one sort of private space we see of Harvey Weinstein's throughout the whole movie. So it was really important that we nail it and kind of show this manipulation and this grooming that he perpetuated for decades, and sort of the inner workings of how this space becomes his workspace also becomes this place where he abuses people.
Yeah, we had to do certain things to bring it back into period too. So we had to remove the flat screen TV, replace it with the CRT TV. Harvey always had a fax machine put into his hotel suites. So we put in a fax machine and change all the telephones. I worked really closely with our florist, Tess Casey, from Aisling Flowers about getting floral arrangements, because floral arrangements in this area were in abundance. There was no shortage of flowers, especially in hotel suites. And we worked really closely to make sure that we got ones that were specific to a Dublin hotel in the 1990s. Luckily, Tess herself is Irish, and we had some really long, hilarious conversations about how we were going to get there and not have them look like these beautiful contemporary arrangements. And just little things like that. I think this set was important to me, especially because it was such an important scene showing one of Harvey Weinstein's crimes without the benefit of any actors in it. I think it was all the more powerful for that. Like you said, Regina, like we never see his face. We never give him that much credence. And I really appreciated that this particular set got that much play in the movie, in the final cut.
And you're so right. The setting, the props, the set dressing, it just told so much, like her purse on the floor, the brush, all of that. I mean, I think it gave me a chill watching that. And last but not least, Pippa, how did you use like our SDSA business members throughout the film? How did they support you and for what sets?
Yeah, I used them a lot. So I used Newell props for when I talked about the Capitol Grill, and we had all of those gilt edge, those paintings with intricate frames. Every single one of those came from Newell, because it just so happens that when you're clearing artwork, one of the easiest ways to do it is through a props house. And they had this amazing inventory of oil paintings that were just perfect for that particular set. The other one was Jodi Cantor had quite a few contemporary designer kind of DWR style pieces in her apartment. And we didn't necessarily have the resources to buy them new. So whatever I couldn't find at the outlet, I ended up renting from Bridge Props. They were a great resource for that. They had several things I couldn't find otherwise in the market. And then I worked a lot with Eric at Fabric City and also at Fabric Mill out on Long Island, because we ended up doing a lot of custom upholstery and custom drapes, especially for Laura Madden's house, and then for some select pieces for Megan and Badim's and Jodi's, just to kind of bring it, just to tie in all of the colors and get it and put some extra texture into things and make the patterns more character specific.
I know we didn't talk about the hospital. I think I forgot about that.
Oh man, the hospital. Wow. So again, one of the challenges of shooting during COVID is that we scouted and prepped multiple rooms in a specific hospital, and then got kicked out of said hospital because of improved COVID regulations, or it was a health and safety thing, or I can't remember what it was. So poor Meredith basically had to re-scout another hospital room literally overnight, and we had to redo all of our graphics and our artwork rentals and do this alternate hospital interior. It was really kind of wild, and it was a very COVID specific thing just because we were in a hospital environment.
The doctor's office, the obstetrician's office, was that also in this same hospital, or was that in a different location?
The office was, but the waiting room. So the first location, we were there on the day, and they made it through the waiting room scene at the OBGYN where she's on the call, where Megan's on the call. So that was at the original hospital. And then that was the only thing we could get there. And so then we shifted everything over to this other location in Roosevelt Island that has a wing that was open to shooting. So we ended up splitting the OBGYN stuff between those two locations, but then everything else was at this one location. But again, it ended up working out well because they had enough distinct areas where obviously we had to do a lot of heavy lifting, but we were able to sort of carve out these different spaces that already, pre-existed. Because when that happened originally, I was worried we were going to just have to build everything. And we were not in a situation to be on like a build schedule that was going to be able to be pulled off. So that was something that Grace Kwan, I really credit her with sort of just pulling up as quickly as she could. And then we just, boogied over there and resized all the graphics. And
yeah, I mean, dressing some of these locations really felt like it was like a special forces operation almost. like getting in there and dressing it and getting it done the nick of time before shooting crew get there. And then also getting the hell out because everyone else had to move to another location, shooting the next day. It's just one of those wacky film things where you think, no one in normal life has to try to pull off something like this.
I think you both as a team became two logistics wizards, pulling it off. Like I said, 150 something sets. Thank you both for joining us and letting us know all about, the insight of the making of She Said and your collaboration. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Inside the Set with Set Decor. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, setdecor.com.